he was really isolated and he couldn't communicate with anyone because there wasn't really many people teaching English at the time to Korean people. When he was growing up, he would get into trouble and act out. And at some point, he ended up in the juvenile system. The San Francisco public school system and juvenile authorities declared him mentally disturbed. By 1965, they diagnosed him as a teenage schizophrenic and committed him to the Macaulay Institute at St. Mary's Medical Center after a suicide attempt while being held at juvenile hall. He was later admitted to Napa State Hospital in March of 1966 for 3 months, and then he was transferred to a foster home after he was declared sane. He proceeded to run away from his foster home in October of the same year, and he was picked up by the authorities and served a 13-month sentence with the California Youth Authority. Starting in the summer of 1967, he was left with limited education and experience in America outside of detention facilities and mental hospitals. So this kind of upbringing would really prepare you to go in a route that most wouldn't. On June 7th, 1973, when he was just 20 years old, Lee was arrested for the murder of Yip Yee Tak. At the time, Lee was under probation for a previous crime, which had started on June 5th, 1972. He was charged with grand theft from a person, and he had pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 180 days in county jail and 3 years of probation. So, if you're caught doing a crime and you're on probation, it is not going to look good. Or if you're allegedly caught. Yip Yee Tak was a youth advisor for the Ching, who was gunned down in the early evening on June 3rd, 1973, as a part of the continuing gang war between the Ching and Joe Boys. So I compiled a little bit of information about these two gangs. Ching was founded in 1964 and detail is important. Among the mugshots that the police selected for the witnesses, there was Lee's photograph. The detail that is important: Lee's mugshot was dated 1969. In this picture, he was 16 years old, and when this crime happened, he was 20. If you're a 16-year-old boy going through puberty, you would look a little bit different than what you look like now, I would assume. A subsequent autopsy recovered the .38 caliber bullets from Tak's body. A discovery was made that the .38 caliber special had been taken during a robbery of the Sung Sing Theater in Chinatown. Ballistic comparison to rounds test fired indicated that the .38 caliber special recovered from Beckett Alley was indeed the murder weapon. The day before Tak was killed, police officers responded to reports of gunfire at an apartment on Broadway rented by Lee. They removed the bullet from the wall facing the window of Lee's apartment. Lee was arrested at approximately 11 p.m. on June 7th as he was returning to his apartment. At the time of his arrest, Lee was carrying a Colt Python, I don't know how to say it, like 357 caliber. I don't think that's right. It says like .357 revolver and had 41 rounds of .38 caliber ammunition in his pocket. So, sorry for being confusing there. But according to the officer that arrested him, Lee was being handcuffed and he said, "Go ahead and kill me. I would rather, die than be arrested." When he was being questioned, the officers actually whipped him across the nose with the bag full of .38 caliber bullets. So they were hitting him across the face, and then he made this statement saying, "Go ahead and just get rid of me, just kill me." And during the drive to the Hall of Justice, he said, "You guys are always picking me up. Last time it was robbery, this time it's murder, and I was just going home tomorrow." He referred home to Korea. According to Lee, after he was advised again of his rights at the Hall of Justice, he requested a lawyer, as you would do. Inspectors Frank Falson and Jack Cleary told him that if his story checked out, he would be released and would not need an attorney. Now, after this statement, the police then recorded their conversation. So after saying this false statement, Falson and Cleary began recording their conversation. On June 11th, the 3 of the 5 witnesses that witnessed the murder came to the station to identify who was the killer, and they ended up showing Lee, pointing at Lee, saying that he was the one. But the most important detail here is that of the mugshots identified by the witnesses shortly after the shooting, only Lee was brought into the lineup. So there was none of the other people in the lineup to be, selected who might be the killer. No, they didn't pick any of the other people from the mugshots of the suspected killer. Only Lee was picked, which I think is so stupid. Why? A lot of things with this investigation start getting even more unprofessional. Firstly, recording their conversation after telling him something false, and then not using a proper aged picture of what Lee obtain a conviction. See, the thing about the police, they just want to solve cases and just like shut them and not waste time sometimes. This is one of those. Clifford Gould, a public defender from the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, was appointed to Lee's defense in June of 1973 after his arrest, but withdrew after the trial venue was moved to Sacramento. Lee was subsequently assigned to Hamilton Hintz, a public defender from Sacramento, on April 2nd, 1974. Hintz accepted the assignment on assistant from the SFPD, but never materialized. Although the SFPD's office was provided with the names of the witnesses who could provide an alibi for Lee's whereabouts at the time of the shooting, that office had failed to follow up on those witnesses. So the witnesses that were supposed to provide an alibi for Lee were never called, never questioned. Moreover, they were never contacted to provide statements and were no longer available to testify by the time the trial began on June 3rd, 1974. Mr. Hintz was later faulted for ineffective counsel, as he had called Inspector Frank Falson as a defense witness and asked Falson if he knew of any motive why Tak was killed. Now, the inspector said, incriminating things about Lee. He took this opportunity and he basically created stories to make Lee look like he was the killer. The trial court was also faulted for not allowing Lee to withdraw the coercive change of venue. In addition, key evidence wasn't provided to Lee's defense attorneys during discovery, including alternative theories for the motive, the existence of percipient witnesses, that some witnesses may have seen the killer exit a 10 Cadillac several minutes prior to the shooting, and that some police reports and polygraph results supported Lee's innocence. And his defense attorneys were not provided of this evidence. Blows my mind. What were the attorneys even doing if they were not? These are like the basic things that you should have to like defend your client. When he was arrested after the Chinatown shooting in 1973, Lee was often referred to as Chinese. He was born in Korea. The only witnesses who testified at his first trial were 3 white out-of-town visitors. After his release, he spoke passionately against the horrors of incarceration. Prison, he says in one clip, destroys every human dignity in a person. It destroys your spirit and destroys your mind. Inspector Falson testified that he believed Lee was a gun for hire paid by the watching gang to kill Tak after Tak had allegedly misappropriated funds from the gang. So Tak was apparently stealing from the gang, so watching hired Lee to kill him is the story that Inspector came up with. But the funny thing is, several of the potential gun the inspector thought, let's go with this story instead. The conviction was won in part of the damning testimony of Falson, who had been invited by the defense to testify about his knowledge of a motive as to why Mr. Yip Yee Tak was killed. In the writ of habeas corpus, the San Joaquin Public Defender's Office later stated the defense counsel had no purpose in opening the door to rumors, rank gossip, prior arrests, suggestive affiliations, and other grossly prejudicial and patently inadmissible evidence which poured into the case during Falson's testimony. End quote. So basically, a lot of the evidence that these inspectors claimed were hearsay would not hold up during court of law, right? We all followed, well, at least I followed, even a simple defamation case would not allow hearsay in the court. It is just not actual evidence. Moving on, when Deputy District Attorney Lazard completed his cross-examination of Inspector Falson, the defense lay in charts. Lee testified that he had met his girlfriend at the Fairmont Hotel after her shift ended, at approximately the same time when the shooting occurred. The pair walked back to Chinatown via Stockton and ate at a restaurant at Jackson and Grant before returning to his apartment at approximately 11 p.m. He said the gunshot on June 2nd had occurred while he was cleaning the gun. Lee was convicted of first-degree murder on June 19th and was sentenced to life in prison on July 10th. His conviction was upheld by the Court of Appeal, 3rd Appellate District on April 30th, 1975, and he served his sentence at Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, California. Alerted by young Asian American supporters of Chol Soo Lee from San Francisco about his innocence, investigative reporter K.W. Lee from the Sacramento Union embarked on a 6-month investigation in June 1977 into what became known as the Alice in Chinatown murder case. While he was in prison in October 8, 1977, Lee actually stabbed Morrison Needham, who was another inmate who is apparently a neo-Nazi, in a prison yard altercation in the Dual Vocational Institution where he was at. Lee said that he was acting in self-defense, but eventually was charged with murder with special circumstances because of his prior murder conviction, which called for the death penalty. So, he was sentenced to death. The first 2 articles by K.W. Lee appeared in the Sacramento Union on January 29th, 1978. After this incident has happened, it questioned the verdict in the murder of Tak, basically bringing up everything that was not adding up in the investigation. The continuing investigative series prompted a local reporting an unlawful detention or imprisonment because, as we talked about, he didn't really go to school. He had limited education. He didn't understand English when he arrived to the US, and he didn't have experience with it. He didn't have any knowledge of the justice system either. And he was provided an attorney from the San Joaquin County Public Defender's Office on October 18th, 1977. So he was arraigned for the stabbing of Needham, the neo-Nazi, which I don't know if it's true or not. I saw it in an article, newspaper article. So one of the key pieces of evidence that wasn't disclosed by the prosecution during discovery was a police report filed by Inspector Falson, dated June 6, 1973, and in that report, which directly refuted his unsourced assertion, so he was talking out of his ass, that Tak's death was a contract killing and therefore first-degree murder. 3 alternative theories were advanced for Tak's killing, including that Tak was a suspect in 3 rapes. In addition, the police report of June 6th included a statement from a confidential informant that asserted that just before Tak was killed, he was seen having coffee with another person before apparently reaching some sort of argument, and then an argument began. Some sort of agreement, sorry. Whoever he was having coffee with, maybe it was another gang member, they had an agreement, but then, people saw them arguing. And the habeas hearing was held in 1978 and granted in February of 1979. Meanwhile, Lee was tried and convicted for first-degree murder relating to the stabbing incident in prison, and he was sentenced to death for that in May of 1979. He remained in prison on that charge until August of 1983, and then he agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge and was released. He served nearly 10 years in prison and was given credit for time served and freed from prison. Even after all of those years spent in prison, Lee never received an apology or compensation from the state for the wrongful conviction of the 1973 murder. He lived in San Francisco for the rest of his life. After his release, Lee did struggle a lot with drug use and he lapsed back into crime. He was arrested numerous times for narcotics related offenses, and he was really open about this. There was another incident where Lee and a friend of his were hired actually to burn down a house belonging to Peter Chong in 1991. The arson went in a bad way and Lee was left with third-degree burns over 90% of his body. He testified after that against Chong after the people who hired him for the arson failed to pay up. He was later arrested for the arson and sentenced to 3 years probation after pleading guilty. And after that, he finally managed to kick his drug habits and found work. He worked as a janitor and he began speaking publicly to groups of Asian American youth. In the midst of numerous speaking engagements, he was a public speaker. He shared his story with the Bay Area teenagers, young people, stressing the importance of engaging with the Asian American community. In a 2005 interview, Lee said the message that should be drawn from his case, and the movement supporting him was that the purity, the unselfishness, the integrity of people giving to a stranger. He was very grateful. Lee's story challenges the model minority myth often associated with Asian Americans. You know how the stereotype of Asian people just being really hardworking and studying and being smart. But Lee had struggled with institutionalization. He was in a mental health facility. He was, acting out since an early age. And he has addiction as well. After his release, he was really open about the difficulties of adjusting to life after prison and with his fame that came after this case was just basically everywhere in the news. He also drafted an autobiography which is named Freedom Without Justice, because he never really got the justice that he deserved for the first alleged crime. This autobiography was completed by University of California at Davis professor Richard S. Kim. Chol Soo Lee passed away on December 3rd, 2014 in San Francisco from complications of a gastric disorder. At the time of his death, he was 62 years old. The way that I found out about his story was I got an advert from Mubi because they just released a documentary about his basically case, his trials, and how he was falsely accused of murder. his unfortunate time spent in prison and probably caused a lot of trauma and issues after prison, like he talked about with his drug addiction and just dealing with how to cope with all of that. I know that he was not perfect, but he was not a murderer. He didn't have a support system. He didn't have a family. He didn't have people who cared for him, which really makes me sad. This is not like a person who like killed someone before, being convicted. He was not actually guilty of something like that after, before going to prison. And I do believe that the incident in the prison was because of self-defense, because I just choose to believe that he was a good person, whether you agree with me or not, because we can't know like everything that happened, but I just want to believe in the good of people. And a lot of parts with his case show how, he was called Chinese when he was Korean. There was a lot of racial injustice that goes into this case, like the former case that I covered about the Central Park 5. Somebody commented under that video and said that, those young kids weren't all that innocent. They were getting into crimes and stealing stuff and all kinds of, things. They were not innocent, but they didn't kill anyone. And they were kids. He was 20 years old. When you put it like that, it's just like, we cannot excuse his crimes, but we can't flat out say that he's a horrible, terrible person. Can we? There is a lot of nuance to these kinds of cases, I think. I know it went really dark behind me, but I hope you enjoyed the background. I lit a candle and put this cute little pillow there. You can see some of the painting. I tried to create a nice environment for us to sit in, I guess. So yeah, let me know what you think about this case. Have you heard of any similar ones that you want me to cover? Because I do enjoy covering these more than just flat out horrible, terrible people that just do it, mostly because they have drama too, but some of them are just terrible. Like the woman that cooked her husband. You could watch that. It's somewhere on my true crime playlist. Yeah, I do have a true crime playlist, so it usually comes up after this video or like linked in a card somewhere. So if you are more interested in true crime, you can go and binge watch that or watch it in a healthy way, one by one. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, don't forget to subscribe. I really, really appreciate you guys subscribing, watching my videos, like interacting with them, leaving comments. I read every single comment, even though some of them are not that nice to read. Just because I don't reply to you always doesn't mean that I did not see your comment, alright? And yeah, leave me some cases you want me to cover, even. I might do another poll in my community tab. So yeah, I wish